Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and get us started. Welcome to today's webinar, Acing Academic Job Interviews. My name is Amy Wilson. I am the Office and Marketing Manager at the National Postdoctoral Association. This panel is meant to provide insight and strategies into navigating the academic hiring process. Before I pass this along to Dr. Williams-Carter for introductions, I do just want to give you guys a little bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded. If for some reason you do have to drop out early, it will be available on our website by the end of the week. The panelists will be going through and discussing different topics. At the end, we will leave a little bit of time for questions. If you have a question for one of our panelists, we ask that you type it in the chat. We ask that you type it in all caps and uppercase letters just to make it easier to identify within the chat so it doesn't get lost in the messages. If you do have any tech issues, you feel free to send me a direct message and I can help you with those. Again, this will be a panel discussion, but we do want people to provide questions and insight as we go through. So with that, I will pass this along to Dr. Williams-Carter for her introduction and introduction of all of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you today and really talk about Acing academic job interviews with some great panelists today. I also want to go over a little bit about LS-PAC MODELS Center and who we are before we get started. And so some of you, whoever attended the conference just a little while ago may have met us at the table, but for those who didn't, we are an NSF Louis Stokes Regional Center of Excellence, one of 8 centers that was funded a few years ago. We're dedicated to preparing historically underrepresented students for academic careers in STEM. And we service not just undergrad or grad students, but postdocs and early career faculty as well. And so our vision is really to create a nationwide model for increasing the underrepresentation in STEM in academic careers. And so we're using evidence-based frameworks to do this and compiling some really cool components to support the students who are in our center. So our goals are really to increase not only the number, but the quality of students who are pursuing their doctoral degrees, increase the retention to graduation rate of URM students. And as I mentioned before, create that national model and develop a pipeline for really placing these students in the professoriate. So we have a lot of cool things happening right now. Our mentors and mentees interact through an app and website, which we're launching very soon. We're so excited to have the new version come out, but we're also having a conference this summer where we're broadening, the title of it is Broadening STEM Pathways, Creating Inclusive and Equitable Academic Ecosystems. And so we have some really cool speakers, 3 of them confirmed. I don't know if Kristen is gonna shake her head at me. We have a couple who have confirmed, Lord, I'm drawing a blank and I want to share names, look at this. We have Dr. Michelle Claville, who is confirmed, who will talk to us about some mentorship. Dr. Isaiah Warner, who is the founder of our center, who will come in and really open us up, and some other cool names that I won't disclose right now. But if you're interested, we're accepting abstracts right now. The proposals are open until May 31st. If you do submit, we're covering your registration as well as your hotel and lodging. So if you need more information, we'll have our email and website dropped into the chat as we go along. So let's just jump right into it and meet our panelists for today. So as I mentioned before, you have some really cool speakers that will be before you today. Dr. Viridiana Herrera, Dr. Brendan Harmon, Dr. Isaiah Speight, Dr. Rashanique Quarels, Dr. John Ashby, and Dr. Fatima Rivas. And so we want to jump right into it and allow them to tell you about themselves, their postdoctoral journey, their academic search hiring process, and just overall what it was like to kind of ensue academia. And so Dr. Viridiana, we're going to let you go first.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Viridiana Herrera. I graduated from the University of Oklahoma with my PhD in biochemistry. At that time, I knew that I wanted to pursue a career in academia and mostly work with undergraduate students. So I set out to look at postdocs that would put me in that trajectory, applied for IRACTA programs, which I can talk about later, and then did my postdoc at Penn. Currently, I'm an assistant professor at Lincoln University, and I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Dr. Harmon.
I'm Brendan Harmon. I'm an assistant professor of landscape architecture at Louisiana State University. I did a Ph.D. in design at North Carolina State University, and then a postdoc in geospatial analytics after that.
Thank you, Dr. Speight.
Hey, everybody. My name is Isaiah. I graduated from Norfolk State University in 2016. So I have an HBCU background that was very important to me going through the rest of my career. I got my PhD last year, a little over last year, from Vanderbilt University, and then came out to Irvine for my postdoc. And so I'll be starting a faculty position. I'm not in one yet, but I'll be starting one in a little bit at the College of William and Mary next year. And so in that interim year, I'm kind of working some things out to go join the process group at AbbVie for a year and then start my job. So a little bit of an unorthodox path, but I'll share some information about that as we go along.
Awesome. Dr. Quarels.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rashanique Quarels. I earned my undergraduate degree at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I earned my PhD from LSU, working with Dr. Justin Reagans, and I did my postdoc with Jeffrey Johnston at Vanderbilt. I just completed my second year as an assistant professor at Rowan University here in Glassboro, New Jersey. And I enjoy research, particularly working with undergrads, but we are starting a PhD program. So we're on the trajectory to get more students in and work towards the professorate.
Thank you. Dr. Ashby.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Ashby. I'm an assistant professor at Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts. It's a small liberal arts college. So I did my graduate work at the University of California, Riverside, working with Professor Wenwan Zhang in bioanalytical chemistry. And then from there, I did a pair of postdocs. I did a research-focused postdoc at UC Davis under Professor Sheila David looking at DNA repair. And then I went on to do a teaching-focused postdoc at Mount Holyoke College through the Consortium for Faculty Diversity program, which is a program designed for helping increase the diversity at small liberal arts colleges and giving people who didn't have that liberal arts experience a chance to experience it before they start applying for those programs. So I've been there for 6 years in total, two as a visitor through that program, and now 4 as an assistant professor. And I'm looking forward to telling you a bit more about that later on.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Rivas.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you to share my story. So I think I'm probably the oldest in the group. So I'm not going to tell you when I got my PhD, but I got my PhD at UCSD. And right after I graduated, I did a postdoctoral fellowship as an IRACTA fellow. And I see that Dr. Herrera was also an IRACTA fellow. And so I did have a non-traditional approach to my career. So right after that, I took a faculty non-tenure position at a hospital setting for 10 years. And then I came here at LSU and I'm an assistant faculty in the Department of Chemistry. So I'm an organic chemist by training, but I do a lot of molecular biology in the type of work that I do. And I'm extremely excited about sharing my story with you because I think that sometimes you think that trajectories need to be linear. And they don't necessarily need to be linear for you to be happy. Sometimes you have to take a chance and take a little break, do something different that is going to help you achieve your specific goals, because everyone is different. So you don't have to be like everyone else. And so you need to make sure that you do pursue a career in something that you're very interested in, because I really enjoy my my time at a hospital setting, because it's very different from academia. And I'm looking forward talking to all of you today.
All right, so exciting. Let's just jump right in. And so this question is for Dr. Speight, Harmon, and Quarels. Can you share some of your best practices or lessons learned for ACE in your academic interviews? And jump right in. You don't have to go in any order.
Okay, so my suggestion is when you go on an interview, most of the universities provide you with a schedule. So although it seems time consuming, make sure that you read some articles about the faculty's research that you're going to meet, so that you have some talking points laid out. Even if you need to create like flashcards for yourself to kind of get those talking points down, come prepared, right? The expectation is that you have some scientific talks and conversations with these professors in your individual meetings. So you want to make sure that you're not just staring at them, but you're having something to talk about, specifically your research and potentials for collaboration if possible, or areas where you think you could make suggestions that might be useful.
Dr. Harmon, Dr. Speight. Oh, I see you talking, Dr. Harmon, sorry.
Often there's a first round of interviews that are online. And in those cases, just the best practices for Zoom meetings, webinars, all apply. So make sure you get somewhere really nice and quiet, somewhere private where you won't be disturbed. Family won't be coming in, definitely not a public space like a cafe. Try to get good lighting, clear background or a filter if it's Zoom, maybe even a green screen if you can. Think about investing in a good microphone if you need to. But I think depends on your personality, but those can be some of the hardest interviews because you don't have the people in front of you. On Zoom, for example, it's hard to know when to talk, to be interrupted by someone else, or you'll be getting multiple questions at the same time sometimes, and it'll be hard to figure out which one to answer. So be prepared for that first round of interviews if you have it.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that comment about the first round of interviews. It's really a good time to get a preliminary feel for the people who you may be working for in the future, right? Or working with in the future. And to that extent, be your genuine self. So that way they know who they are getting when you eventually nail that on-site interview. There's no parts of you that you have to be shy about. And I kind of learned this the hard way. I was on an interview and I got asked, well, what's your teaching philosophy for a student who may be struggling in a prereq course that then leads to them struggling in your course? And apparently this was a landmine question that I didn't know was a landmine. The university that I was interviewing with was having some issues with students who were just coming out of like the pandemic, graduating from high school and struggling with math. And they were like, well, we have real problems with it. So of course I give them, the philosophical, I take my time with my students and I make sure that everyone is well engaged. And they're like, okay, we get that, but like, how do you fix it? And I took a step back and I said, okay, well, here's how I fix it. And so I told them about how when I was struggling in college, my professors taught me how to play chess and how chess was my way of overcoming, fundamental problem solving. And they really liked that. And that's something that was like, okay, I can still tell my personal anecdotes and they apply to the situation at hand. And that shows them what I bring to the table as a unique applicant. And so make sure that you show that personal side of yourself when it's appropriate when it applies to questions, and it'll give you a little bit of edge, and it shows that you are a lot more than just a researcher and an educator, but you're a mentor, and you're, you know, diverse in how you approach problems with students, and, you know, in your research and in your teaching.
Awesome, thank you. I think this leads into my next question. So when you're being your authentic self and you have a true passion for, let's say, outreach or research or teaching, and you want to communicate this so that comes across very early in your interview, what are some tips and tricks and strategies you use to communicate that? And this question is for Dr. Rivas, Ashby, and Herrera.
Okay, I think that if you have a passion, there's going to be a track record that shows what you already done. So they already have seen, to some extent, they have seen what you have done. And it's really important to have a track record. So, and this is something even for the students that are applying, even if it's not for a postdoctoral position, but if it is for a fellowship or a scholarship, you need to have that in your resume or your CV. You need to make sure that the amount of hours of service that you have provided. For instance, I am very active with SACNAS, but I have a very strong track record of the activities and the time that I have spent with them. So it's not just saying I'm interested in advocating for a specific group, but I have evidence that I have conducted that type of system. And sometimes if you're visiting, for the ones that are applying for assistant faculties, appointments for those individuals, I think it's very important that you go to the website and look at the specific programs that the universities already have in place and contact them. Okay, make sure that you already have a few people on that site that you're going to be able to connect and ask. You know, sometimes they ask you if there's specific people that you like to meet with, and so those would be the people that you would ask, you would request to meet with them, so that they see that you are genuinely interested and committed to support those specific groups that you would like to support as you move along your career.
So a few other things to add on to that is that when you're communicating your science as scientists, we also tend to be very much into the jargon. We get very detailed, we get very specific, but many times you're speaking to a broader audience. I'm a biochemist that does molecular biology, right? In my hiring panel, we had an organic chemist who knew nothing about the type of work that I was doing. So while you have to find a nice balance between providing enough detail for the people that know what you're talking about, will know that you're not BSing, but also not too specific to lose the rest of your audience. So you have to find a nice balance between that. In other instances, for example, at Lincoln University, we are primarily an undergraduate institution, and the hiring process takes into account the vote of the students. And so one of the big warnings was that I received is coming from a big institution that is 100% research focused, which is Penn, going to a smaller institution, a lot of that information in between is getting lost. So you come in with a big old jargon that you're used to speaking with your colleagues, trying to speak with the same language to undergraduate students. Those undergraduate students understand nothing. They think you are boring. They give back that information to the job panel or the people collecting all of that data, and make clear comments as the fact that you cannot relate. You cannot take information and communicate it in a way that is appropriate for that audience. So make sure to understand your audience, and not only understand your audience, but try to tackle the majority in that audience. So that's what I would say in terms of communicating your science, is to take a step back. One of the things that I did when preparing is I invited friends from different places, some that were just that had never heard my research, and asked them, do you understand what I'm trying to get through? Or no, you're being too detailed or specific. So discussing that, going through your presentation with people that are not familiar with it will help you get it to the level that will come across very clear. In terms of teaching, one of the things that Dr. Riva mentioned is being genuine, because and if you actually have a passion, all of that will follow. A lot of the applicants that competed for the same position, I was later told that they spoke from their teeth out, but didn't actually were never actually active in what they preached. So make sure that if you're preaching that you're going to be inclusive and you're going to be representative of diversity, or whatever you're trying to preach that you're going to do, that you have a way to show that, yes, I'm actually going for it. And it doesn't have to be that you're leading a national organization. It could be that you're just working on a panelist to learn a little bit more, providing feedback, taking notes, could be something small, but that you're actually involved in such activities. I think that that's the way that you communicate. And this also applies to your teaching activities. If you are gonna say, okay, I'm going to focus my classroom in active learning, do you actually have experience in active learning? It doesn't necessarily mean that you yourself have done active learning, but maybe you went into a class that actually you really enjoyed. And learning is also something that you can talk about, that you really enjoyed this classroom the way that it was meant, and you want to incorporate that in the future. But it has to show that it is genuine, and that you know what you're talking about.
So I'll start with the teaching and then go to the research, so I can piggyback off of some things that Viridiana already said. But in terms of talking about some of the pedagogy aspects, one thing that I've sort of heard about for people who may not have experience with these different types of pedagogy to start is they try to fill their teaching statement with everything. So sort of a list of all of the different buzzwords that are the hot topics at the moment. So like, I want to use active learning. I want to use community-based learning. I want to use flipped classroom, guided inquiry. And you can't realistically fit all of that stuff in, especially not starting out as an assistant professor when your goal should be to get your lab up and running. So my suggestion with that is to pick one or two that you feel most comfortable with and then go from there. So for instance, for me, when I wrote my teaching statement, I focused on the idea of integrating case studies into my class, because that could be ways to sort of tie research and teaching together. And it was something that I already had a bit of a passion about as an analytical chemist, showing how a lot of what you're learning in that classroom is directly applicable to things in society and outside of academia as a whole. So even if you don't have experience with them, yeah, doing some of the research on it and then picking one or two to try and focus on how you might use them in the classroom is very important. From the research standpoint, I'll give some advice that is a bit more focused for working at a PUI. One big difference between PUIs and research-intensive institutions is the fact that you're only working with undergraduates. So thinking about the scope, making sure that your scope is not too ambitious, making it sure that it doesn't look like one that you're using to apply to an R1 type institution. And thinking about how can your research be broken up into smaller chunks. So showing that you can sort of already think about how your research might get broken up so that different students can work on different parts. That shows that you're thinking more about, yes, these students may only be working for a semester or a year. How can I organize my research so that it gives them their best experience while still advancing my goals? So those are sort of the big advices I have for teaching and research specifically.
I'm going to add something to that, because I think that that was a really good point, is that yes, you have to focus at the institution that you're going. Research what type of equipment they have available. If you're proposing to do NMR and there's no NMR around, where are you planning on doing those experiments, right? You're also going to be limited by undergraduate students. If you're going to a liberal arts, they have a packed schedule. They can't spend 6 or 5 days every week to get research running. So you have to consider the types of activities that you can realistically do at your new institution. And what I've come across is that again, coming from a big medical school into a small liberal arts, my idea of the research that I was going to be doing was very unrealistic. I'm finding myself, it really was very unrealistic. I'm finding myself attending new workshops to try to learn something different that is more computer-based, or something that can be done on the weekend, something that doesn't require 8 hours in a wet lab, because the students will never find that time. And unfortunately, I won't either. It's okay if you propose something and you change your mind later, but make sure that it's okay with your committee and the process. So yeah, making sure that your proposals are realistic and take into account the actual equipment available is a must.
Excellent. And so my next question, as I know all of you guys are very much so passionate about outreach and supporting students on the side, how do you communicate this in your interviews? Or is that the best time to communicate your desire for outreach and supporting students? And this question, I should say, it's going to Dr. Quarels and Dr. Ashby.
Sorry. Did you want to go first? Okay. So I think one of the big things that's kind of been seen as a byline through all of this is showing example. If you're trying to show that you're passionate about service, show examples of how you've done service in the past. It doesn't have to be large forms of service. It can be, oh, I'm interested in diversity. I may not have volunteered, but I have gone to diversity related workshops to show that I want to learn more about this process so that I can contribute to it. The other thing to think about as a incoming assistant professor is try to keep your ideas sort of smaller in scope to start. It's good to show passion at the big level, but a lot of the service that you may be more expected to do at the early stage is service to your department, service to if you're at a big university, your college rather than the entire university as a whole. So thinking about not grand sweeping things to start, but more how can you slot yourself into what is being worked on at the beginning, and then thinking about how you might do new contributions later on.
So those are all great points, John. I want to add by saying another way to show your passion is actually through your talks, right? Both your teaching talk as well as your research talk. So it's important if you're going to a teaching institution that when you're speaking about your research, you give some background, right? Why is this important? How does this mechanism work? How do these things happen as far as their understanding? So you can convey that to your wide audience, as Viridiana said earlier, right? So you're sharing that information with your students. Some of the professors might not know either, because some of those people sitting in the audience are probably from different backgrounds. So I'm an organic chemist by training as well. So me talking about a mechanism probably sounds very boring to an inorganic chemist or an analytical chemist, but the students who may be interested and engaged can learn more by us talking more in depth about that particular topic or how an instrument works and why we get the results that we get, right? So being very strategic about how you present your research so that your audience can see your passion in the way you talk.
I want to open the floor just a little bit for this. I see a hand. Dr. Speight, go ahead.
Yeah, so since we're talking about like showing your genuine self and your passion, right? I think, we're talking a little bit about like how to get the outreach portion out too. I put it in my cover letter. It was very apparent in the last paragraph of my cover letter. I'm a big proponent of Novachet. Novachet has helped me in a lot of ways over the last couple of years of my life. Got the shirt. So like Novachet was a very important thing to me to bring to whatever institution I was at, or if they already had it, to continue it. And so in that last paragraph, it talked about my involvement with Novachet, bringing an active chapter to the institution, and then broadening diversity and inclusion through outreach in the area. And then from there, that already set a tone of, this is what I know I want to do. And if you don't like that, it's in the cover letter, you can move on. Then from there, you know, like Dr. Quarels was saying, show it in your talks. Every talk that I gave that was a pitch for what my research group would do, the last slide showed the facets outside of the research. Involvement in groups like Novachet or SACNAS or OSTEM, involvement in outreach programs to help further my students, such as the Leadership Alliance program. All of that stuff was stuff that I made sure was on the very front end. So that way, when they go to the discussion after I leave, they can't question whether it's something that I want to do or whether it's something that I know about or whether it's something that I care about. It is right there. And since you put it in your talks, you get to show that energy, not just in a one-on-one meeting, but you get to show it across the board. And then the other place that you can do it too is when you do have those one-on-one meetings and ask a question. How does your department support this? Has your department investigated looking into being a part of this group? Or have you, sent any of your students to these types of conferences? Those are the types of questions that you can ask to get a feel for what the department has or what they may have a need for, so that way you can better market yourself as that new piece that can add in. And like John was saying, it's all about adding to, like at the beginning stage, adding to the department. And I think that's why groups like Novachet or SACNAS are good, because they service a smaller field of chemists, scientists, engineers. So you're not branching all the way out to the entire institution. You're starting in a place that's literally in your own backyard, and then you can build outward. And since those groups are typically smaller, you have a much easier pathway to make an impact, because the group isn't something that's going to need $15,000 a year to support, right? You need a smaller pot of money, maybe even no money, just to do some freelance, activities. And then that's an easy way to get, things moving and conversations motivated at the early stages.
Excellent additions. Would anyone else like to chime in on this question? Okay. I would like, and I will take a step back because I noticed we didn't give time to this question, but I want to take a moment, and this is for all panelists, to really talk about their transition from their postdoc into their faculty or into whatever intermediate position you're having. Can we talk about your experience? Would you like to go first, Dr. Harmon?
Oh, okay. When I was doing my PhD, I taught several classes, perhaps too many at some point for my research. I had to scale back a bit on teaching responsibilities during my PhD, but I had a pretty good portfolio of teaching. And by the time I finished the PhD, went on the job market and secured a faculty position before I started a postdoc. And so I did a postdoc just for 3 months over the summer to tide me over until I started.
Thank you. Dr. Herrera?
So I actually went into my postdoc that is geared to putting you in a setting for becoming faculty at an institution. So it is an IRACDA program. It is IRACDA Institutional Research and Academic Career Development Award. There are about 23, 24, I don't know, that number changes across the United States. And so this postdoc was a 3-year fellowship from the NIH. I was able to do one full year before COVID struck. Then the second year is when we do our teaching experiences, and that is when I was able to get a real experience teaching as a lecturer at Lincoln University. And so I was also reading some of the questions here. And how do you decide when you were ready? I did not think I was ready to move on when I was asked to apply for the position. I actually initially declined. And then they had my current chair had to sit down with me and says, well, explain to me why you think you're not ready. I also spoke with my postdoc advisor at that time, and he had the same comment, because you never think you're ready. It's also going to be dependent on what your goals are. Obviously, with a 2-year postdoc, if you're trying to go to an R01, that's not going to be enough. But my goal has always been in a PWI, or not PWI. I get sidetracked with all the acronyms, primarily undergraduate institution. And so both of those mentors were the ones who kind of encouraged me to really consider it, because we know that faculty positions are difficult to come by as well. So I took a second look, got over my imposter syndrome, because much of it was just that, and went ahead and applied. And so that's going to be very personal as to how you come to that realization, and it's going to be different for each other. I also saw here another question about how much teaching. Since I did go recently through the hiring process, and we had these several discussions, being a lecturer is going to look much better than mentoring a student as in just the lab, because the not qualities, but the skills necessary to run a lab are going to be very different than the skills needed to run a classroom. The way you organize is going to be different. And so I do recommend looking at adjunct positions, or seeking to TA a class if possible, which is something that I was also able to do. TA, it helps, but being the instructor of record is going to open many more doors, especially at a primarily undergraduate institution. Unless you have instructor of record, either through adjuncting or whatever it is, it will be more difficult to be considered for that position. Preference will be given to people with extensive teaching experience. And it's hard, because you might have to do it in the evenings while you're also trying to manage a postdoc, like an online class or something along those lines. But there are ways to go around it.
Dr. Ashby, thank you, Dr. Herrera.
So when talking about the sort of transition between grad school and my current position, I sort of went a similar but different route to Drs. Herrera and Rivas, where I did my teaching and research postdocs as 2 separate things rather than as a combined through the ERACTA program. So one of my thoughts with it was, well, first, full disclosure, I had not heard about the ERACTA program until I was halfway through my traditional postdoc. It's a great program. I would definitely consider it if you get a chance. But for me, I wanted to sort of keep the two a bit bend from one another. I wanted to focus on research and being able to build myself up as an independent researcher, and then have an opportunity to do a little bit of time getting teaching experience before going on the tenure track. So for me, doing that research piece first, first off, let me know that I was more interested in the small liberal arts college rather than a research intensive institution, because I enjoyed when I was mentoring undergrads in that postdoc rather than doing a ton of research on my own. So that gave me an idea that I liked that sort of mentorship aspect a lot. And then going through that Consortium for Faculty Diversity program, the program is sort of a reduced load visiting assistant professorship. So as a postdoc, I was doing 60% of the load of the typical visitor. So rather than doing 3 courses in the fall, 2 in the spring, I was doing 1 in the fall, 2 in the spring. And the purpose of that is to give you some time to get all of the professional development that will help you be an effective teacher at these small colleges. So, oh yeah, the postdoc program is the Consortium for Faculty Diversity, or CFD for short. It's a coalition of a lot of liberal arts colleges, both in New England and sort of in the Southeast and on the West Coast. But yeah, for me, I think because I didn't have as much experience with TAing while I was a graduate student, getting that more discrete teaching experience through a teaching postdoc was really beneficial. And if you don't go that route, even doing a year-long visiting position will help get you that experience to make you much more competitive for these teaching-focused jobs.
All right, Dr. Quarels.
So as a graduate student, I actually reached out to my advisor and he suggested a few different labs, as well as I looked for fellowships myself. So I applied for several fellowships and received 2 of them. One of them was at Vanderbilt as an academic pathways fellow. And so that is something that I would suggest just as you look for scholarship money when you're going off to college. If you're interested in postdocing, there are postdoctoral fellowships. So be on the lookout for those. Similar application materials to your requirements for an academic faculty, just lighter. So you didn't necessarily need a full research plan, but a research plan is still required for the postdoctoral fellowship. Instead of it being 6 pages, it was only 2, with a detailed outline of what you would like to do in that 2 to 3 year span. The fellowships usually require a letter of support from a faculty member. So get some practice early, networking, right? So that you can create those bonds, so you can reach out to that network. For example, Professor Winkler at UPenn was who I was interested in working with. And so I reached out to him, told him I was interested in a fellowship. We worked on my 2-page, very short, research application together. And he submitted a letter of support for that fellowship. And I did earn that fellowship there. Ultimately, I worked with Professor Jeffrey Johnston on a similar proposal at Vanderbilt and chose to go there. So spending time developing those networks so that you can reach out to those professors, even if you don't end up going to those institutions, maintaining those networks. Several of the speaking engagements that I've had in the past 2 years were actually Professor Winkler sending me invitations and sending my contact information out. So even though I did not join his group, he's still very much so an advocate. So apply and get rejected sometimes, but continue to apply. And that same thing will happen with as you go from a postdoc to an academic position, seeking an academic position. You will submit tons of applications. I'm sure I submitted well over 40 and had close to 7 interviews, right? So you will not get every interview, and that's okay, but recognizing that you need to be prepared and your application materials need to be laid out, and you need to have that network so people can speak highly of you when the faculty committees actually reach out to learn more about you from, yes, people at your institution, but also people within the community, right? Because you're going to conferences, you're presenting your research, so your name is out there. So learning more about you in various different avenues is something that hiring committees does do. So be cognizant of your image and what you're putting out there.
I do want to take a second to just echo that. Get comfortable with rejection. Get very, very comfortable with it. Much of the time, it's not going to be you. Simply, universities are looking for something very particular. In some cases, they have they're building hubs for a particular type of research, or they're looking for this, or they're looking for that. And you may be an excellent candidate, but they're just not what you're looking for at that particular moment. So get very comfortable with rejection. You will have to send out a lot of applications in order to find the right fit. How long does the hiring process take? It depends on the type of institution. It could go from several months to even 6 months, I've seen in the past. Although in some instances, if they need to fill a position by the next semester, it'll go really fast. So it's all dependent on where the location is. While I'm speaking, did each of you prepare multiple research plans? Yes, definitely you have to. You have to consider the type of institution that you are applying to. I'm not going to say acronyms anymore. An undergraduate institution is going to be much different from an R01. The types of research that you're expected to conduct at each is going to be very, very different. Also, the types of instrumentation, as we've spoken, in one school might not be available in the other. You could form collaborations, but taking advantage of the resources that your institution does have is going to be key. And it also is going to look great in your when you're actually doing the application process, because it shows that you researched the institution. You know what you're getting yourself into, and you know the resources that are available for you there. So yeah, you have to tailor it. Sending generic applications is going to go straight into the trash can.
Thank you. So I do want to allow Dr. Speight and Dr. Rivas to answer that last question, because I think it's important to hear everyone's trajectory between their postdoc and their faculty position. So, and then we'll address all of the rest of the questions in the checks. I know we have so many. Dr. Rivas, would you like to go?
Oh, very quickly. So I think transitions are really important, and it's critical that you're ready. So I think everyone's already talked about the fact that you need to be preparing. So from graduate school to postdoc, there's a critical time, and I think it's the 4th year. That's the year when you need to be making those connections. And typically your primary mentor is the one that is going to support you the most and is going to provide some guidance. But you need to be reaching out. So actually, when I was a 4th year graduate student, I applied to Rochester Institute of Technology. They had a program. They offered me a job as a faculty, and I was like, oh, that would be exciting. But I remember my mentor told me that's not a good idea. You need to postdoc. And so I decided not to take it. But what I'm trying to get at is that you need to apply to every opportunity, because you never know. But it was a good experience to actually have the interview, go on site, look at the institution, and it allows you to see what do you need to have ready. I wasn't really looking at the time, but the opportunity came out. And so I had the chance to go and visit the institution, talk to the faculty, and it really prepared me for the future. Having said that, going back to my graduate advisor and looking for postdoctoral positions, I was an ERACTA fellow, so that really helped me, because UCSD had one. So I was doing research at Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla with Professor Casey Nicolau, and then I was teaching at San Diego State. So San Diego State is a really large institution. So we had 750 undergraduate students that were teaching as a team. And so that allowed me to give me the experience to teach, and actually hands-on experience that I don't think that I would have been ready. So now my classroom, my organic chemistry class, is 268 students, but I had already that experience, to some extent. So it's not as extreme. So having the opportunity to postdoc at an institution such as San Diego State, doing the teaching, really taught me a lot. So I strongly recommend that during this transition period, make sure that you identify that you broaden your horizon. So even though you might be thinking, well, I want to just go to a teaching institution, you never know. And so I would encourage you to be ready, have 2 applications. So I did do that. And my mentor told me, you should write your proposal and your application as if you're going to go to an R1 institution, and then write one as if you're going to a teaching institution. And so that way you have the 2 applications ready in the event that, at the time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And in fact, I didn't do either. So I went for an academic job, but in a hospital setting. And so I encourage you to make sure that you have different alternatives. So don't settle for just one specific, I have to go to this type of institution. No, be open-minded, but be ready. So plan A, plan B, and plan C.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and jump in with a little bit. Transitioning is always weird. And I think everyone on this panel can say that the transitions that they probably made were not the ones that they dreamt up 4 or 5 years ago before they had to make the transition. And that's okay. The best advice that I got at every stage was try something different. And so as an undergrad, I did polymers and then jumped into sugar chemistry. And that's all can be roped in the umbrella of organic. And then I got to grad school and jumped into inorganic chemistry and main group. And now as a postdoc, I'm jumping out of main group chemistry and doing peptide chemistry. And now after that, I told myself forever I was going to go into academia and start a lab and mentor students. And here I am trying to work out logistics for a 1-year job in industry to then prepare me for my academic job. So do something different. When it comes to writing these documents about your group, you know, everybody's had really great ideas about, you know, taking a project and sizing it to the type of institution, being aware of the instrumentation you have, but get creative. Have one weird idea that you have no bet will work. Just get weird, right? Like just throw something against the wall and see what happens. I think the best idea that I've gotten attached to really just came one day to me in lab. I was sitting back and I was like listening to a talk by a friend of mine's Ph.D. advisor. And I was like, oh, that seems really cool. And then I read a paper, and then a paper turned into a paper, which turned into a review article, which turned into, oh, this could be some weirdo thing that I don't know if it'll work or not, but it'll be fun. So people can tell when you're not engaged or invested in your projects because you don't get excited when you talk about them. So having that joy is important. But when it comes to making the transition, there's always going to be a little bit of uncertainty as to, am I going to be able to do this thing? Am I going to be able to handle this? And that's where it comes important to have that network, having a community, right? I definitely talked to John and Rashanique when I was in my process of like, how do I prepare for these things? What do I need to know? You know, when it came to negotiating startup funds and stuff, Rashanique actually sent me her startup list and was like, you can use this and modify it to what you need. Having a community of people that can help you, that may do what you do and may not, right? One of my friends who was helping me with designing a project, she also works at Lincoln, but she's in computer science. And so she was like, yeah, here's some things that like I think may or may not be feasible for the stuff that you want to do. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Friends that are biologists, and I'm not proposing anything biology related, but just because, you know, they have a totally different lens that they look through, they can pick out the fundamental problems that you've been looking at forever that kind of look like small pebbles, but in all reality, they're road bumps. So I guess the best way to build for transition is also having a team that help you with the transition. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child, but in all reality, it takes a community to build a chemist.
So many gems dropped here. But we want to, in the interest of time, I do want to answer some of the questions that you guys have in the chat. And so let's just jump into them.
So I'll take the startup question. Yes, your budgets need to be drastically different, right? If you're applying to an primarily undergraduate institution, then you need to, one, figure out what the budgets are for that university. Some budgets are up to like 300K, some are closer to 100K. So you need to know that, one, which end you're on. And so that determines what you can spend funds on. For example, at a larger institution, you might have NMR time costs. At a smaller institution like Rowan, we don't have NMR time costs, so I didn't have to factor that into my budget, right? That's an instrument walk up. And so the budget for a R1 is going to be closer to that 500 to 800K. If you can get it, swing for the fences, right? You tell them what you need and you let them tell you where they can meet you in the middle. But you need to be realistic about your budget and your resources. So if there's already major instrumentation there, can you share it if you're at a smaller institution and that takes something off your budget line so you're able to still get a large amount of money and not necessarily have to buy a large instrument, right? Or can you factor that into your startup package? Is that something you can bundle with you? Okay, I'm coming, this is my package. Can you also buy this instrument to go along with my package, but not be in my startup? All right, so make sure that however you design your budget, that you, one, recognize what type of institution you're applying to, note the budgetary limitations, and then try to fit yourself and your research within that.
Awesome. If you see a question you love in the chat, let's jump right in. I think one of the ones that go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, my bad. I see one that says, how long did it take to write the research plans and other documents? It never stops. They are constantly evolving documents. And so the ones that I sent for my first application look radically different from the ones that I sent to the last handful of applications. Ideas change, your perspective on things change, you talk to people and you gain a new perspective or drop an old one. My first proposals were all hardcore wet lab chemistry. My last ones are a hybrid of chemistry and material science and computer science. And so you learn new things and you see new things and you're like, oh, here's this shiny new thing I want to play with. Let me go chase it. And so never just save the document as final, because it's not final. Because if you do it that way, then you're going to have final, final.1, final.1, final for real this time, not really. And the documents just keep going and going. But it's good to have an open-ended document because you can watch your intellectual progress. You can watch your ideas grow and flourish. And then even if there is one that you dropped in the application process that you may want to revisit later, when you're active, you can go back to your application package and be like, what was that idea that I had years ago that I never actually worked on, that I pitched to somebody else? And you open up the document and you say, oh, it's this thing. And you talk about it and you lean into it. So I think when I started writing the documents to the first application was maybe like, and mind you, like I kind of, shoved my head in the ground like an ostrich and just hid for a while to write these up. But I say like from the point that I started to when I submitted the first one was about a month and a half, almost 2 months. But then every time I looked at another application, instead of just submitting the same documents, I opened them up again and gave them a second read and was like, what can I fix or what can I add? And I did that for every application. So I say give yourself about 2 months to write the first one, like to get to a quote final, almost final, not really final document, and then just evolve them as time goes on.
I like to add something to that. Make sure that you negotiate, learn how to negotiate. There's a lot of things that you can get away with, but if you don't ask, they're not going to give them to you. So make sure that if there's something that you really need, ask for it. If that's going to make the difference between your success, make sure that you ask for it. Don't be shy, because you never know. If you don't ask, they might not give it to you. Well, they will not give it to you if you don't ask.
Second, third, and star that, circle that, yes. So definitely ask and negotiate. Prior to my coming to Rowan, the highest startup package that they've given out was $85K. When I left the dean's office, she sent me an email. She said, you are the best negotiator that I've met so far. And I was like, I'll take it. My startup package was, well, it was at least twice that. So I worked them over very well to make sure that I could have all the resources that I need for my students and my lab, right? If the expectations are high, you need the resources to be there as well. And I'll add to Isaiah's point earlier, I actually started very early in the process. So I started in February. Most applications open in that September to November timeframe, if for the next year. So for example, that was 2019. So February 2019, I started working on all of my documents, my projects, as well as my teaching statement, diversity statement, and cover letter. And yes, I edited them for each application, but I started early so that I could make those changes over the summer, read the literature, go back and reread the literature and make sure that I have literature support, as well as the opportunity to do some preliminary experiments, right? And add that data into my research proposals. So being able to give yourself time to, one, show up why your idea is is feasible, is important. And then 2, to be able to make lots of changes over the course of time. I'm a procrastinator, so I can give myself really early deadlines and just take a very long time to do it versus trying to cram all that in a couple of months. So depending on what kind of person you are, give yourself time. There's nothing wrong with extra time. It's better than being late, right?
In the interest of time, panelists, we have several questions that are not answered. If you guys are okay to hang on for a few more minutes, maybe we can take 1 or 2 more questions. I see head nods, perfection. Okay. One of the questions was about teaching. Is it, one of the students said that they had a teaching experience as a graduate student, but none in their postdoctoral experience. Is that going to be enough for research intensive institutions?
So I think it varies. So I can talk from the perspective of William and Mary, because William and Mary is a weird institution because they're primarily undergraduate, but they operate almost like a micro R1 in a way. Like they produce heavily. The most experience I had teaching was in grad school, just kind of as a TA. And then when I got to postdoc, I didn't really have a lot of time between when I was interviewing to develop, teaching ability. I started applying for jobs and interviewing maybe 3 months after I started my postdoc. So kind of like in a similar situation to Dr. Harmon, where he said he had a 3-month postdoc and then jumped right in. I had a 3-month postdoc and then started interviewing. So it was like, let's just go ahead and get the ball rolling. But I think the best thing is to show that, when you're on these interviews and you're doing these teaching demonstrations, pick a topic that you're comfortable with, but not something that you're so comfortable with that you kind of get lazy with the preparation. They'll give you a list of topics in some cases, and they'll say, pick from these 3, prepare a 30 or 45-minute lecture or something like that. But pick something that but you're a little bit wary about, so that way you can get really in there and dig into the topic and understand what you know. And then it also puts you back in a student's seat where it says, okay, well, what did I remember from this as a student, and what helped me learn this topic, and what didn't, and what things could I have done better? Get somebody else's old lecture notes. At this point, your community, right? Because we talk a lot about community. Your community has probably taught a lecture on something like this. One of the members of my community, Steve Townsend, who's at Vanderbilt, he gave me login access to one of his online courses and said, here's everything. Here's the book that they use. Here's all this other stuff. If you need anything, let me know. I could show you some of the handwritten whiteboards that I have, but just pull from whatever you need. So I didn't have a lot of experience. I didn't have any experience actually in postdoc and teaching, but that didn't make a difference, because for William and Mary, they didn't have me do a teaching demonstration. They used my lecture, my scientific lecture, as a way to evaluate my teaching ability. And that's where, how we talked about before, the ability to get a concept across from your research perspective that everyone may not be familiar with is important. I did a part of my talk on metal organic frameworks. Nobody at William and Mary works on metal organic frameworks. And so I had to take a step back and define what a metal organic framework was, how to make them, where they've shown their faces at, what's unique about the way that I'm making them, what's special about the metal organic frameworks that I'm using. And this is going to sound cheesy, but I related metal organic frameworks to Legos, because I feel like everyone can visualize and put together the concept of putting together Legos and building a framework. And then I use that same Lego example to discuss polymorphism. And so that was my way of showing them I can use some versatile examples in my teaching. So for a research intensive institution, they may not ask you to do a explicit teaching demonstration. They may evaluate your ability to educate based on your lecture. And then that is where you can kind of show, I have some skill. I may not have gotten it in my postdoc, but I'm constantly working on the trade.
Right. All right. Are there any other questions out there?
There was one from Ross. So I'll get that since that's my homie. But Ross had asked, let me go find it. He said, did you experience pushback criticism during your interviews, particularly on research proposals? And if so, how did you respond/spin? a response in a non-defensive or aggressive manner. So Ross and I kind of come from the same cloth because we did solid state chemistry in grad school. Mechanochemistry is sometimes very hard to defend to those who just absolutely love their flasks and their toxic solvents and their DMSO and their DMF. And so for us, it's kind of hard to spin the mechanochemistry aspect. So Ross, you already know the types of conversations I had to have. The best way that I found to do it is to say, oh, here's this example that kind of addresses your problem that I've seen in literature. If you want, I could send you this paper later and we can discuss it. Or, you know, having that example already pre-built into your talk, or having a backup slide that addresses a problem that you already know people may have. If you're working in a newer area, something that's a little bit more nuanced that people are skeptical about or cautious about, because remember, kind of like how Rashanique said with like giving you the money to be successful, it's return on investment, right? They want to see that money that they put into you come back to the university in the form of publications, grants, student success, and the track record of sending your students to good locations. And it starts with the ability to give them a solid skill set and it's something that they can learn in. And if they don't trust the research, then they're going to start asking a lot more questions, especially if it's a newer, a little bit more undeveloped area, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. So I always swung it in a positive light. There's only maybe 12 research groups in the US that define themselves as mechanochemistry research groups, maybe even less than that. And so I was like, we would be in a very small group of people who work on this very specific field, but the field is supportive of each other by doing this, this, and that. And here are some examples of the things that people have been able to develop that I can branch outwards from. So just having that information in the back pocket of this situation or this publication addresses this question, this addresses this question, here's how my group will address that question. Maybe it's not answered yet, but here's how we plan to. Just show it more as an opportunity rather than a criticism. A lot of questions about how to optimize for one product, or how do you worry about scale, or is this actually safe, right? Because for primarily undergraduate institutions, you have to build safety into this. I can't work with the same stuff I worked with in grad school, where literally anything that Ross and I made, if you blink at it the wrong way, it's going to ignite. I can't do that anymore. So developing bench stable chemistry for my students was something that was very attractive in my applications. But just having that go mindset of, yes, you may be skeptical of this, but here's how we're going to solve it, or here's how it's already been addressed and how we plan to add to it, is super important.
I want to add two quick pieces to this. One thing is, in terms of the non-defensive aggressive piece of it, the first thing you want to do is acknowledge the concern is valid. So even if you may not think 100% that it's valid, it's something that might be strong enough to someone without the background that they think it's a valid concern. So acknowledge that before you go into your defense of why you think your method will be still suitable despite their concern. And the other piece that I actually had come up with one of my interviews is they had a question of, well, what if this doesn't work? So thinking about what might the pivot be? How can I still use some of this stuff even if my big overarching goal doesn't work? Is there still valuable information I can get from the foundational pieces that I did that aren't directly related to the big picture? So thinking about that sort of pivot is also really valuable when getting this sort of pushback during interviews.
So I'll answer the illegal question. One of them is your marital status. Another one is if you have children, right? All of those things are illegal for them to ask. If you decide to share that information, that's different. There are lots of questions that you can be baited into that will reveal that information. So just be wary of how you answer questions. A part of being yourself, of course, is wanting to know about resources. So if you're asking a colleague about childcare, about the family friendliness of the department, then those are signals that you give off, and you can choose if you want those answers, especially if it's a first interview and they do multiple interviews, right? So if you're doing an online interview, you might not ask it there, but if you get brought on site to do that interview, you might feel more comfortable and want to know those things. And so asking those questions are fine for you, but they can't ask those questions. Asking about the health of your health or the health of family members is illegal. Let's see what else. I'm not sure of all of the illegal questions, but those are the ones that popped into my head. And then there was a question about working as an instructor. So in my experience, working as an instructor is not an automatic, you can't get a tenure track position. I've known several faculty. It's harder, I will say, because once you are in that instructor role, the expectation is that's where you were comfortable or that's where you were confident. And so it's a little bit harder to transition into a tenure track role, but not impossible. So for example, if you are doing research with a faculty member, whether it's chemical education or whether it's bench work, right? And you're applying for a tenure track position now, you can sell yourself in that capacity. This is what I was doing. I initially started off as an instructor. I started working in this lab to hone my skills, right? And to make sure that I am still very much so research active and interested. And this is where I want to go from there. So it's all in how you sell yourself. So don't put that limitation because as you've seen from the various panelists here, there's no one right trajectory for your path. And so being able to brand and sell yourself is the most important thing you can do in an interview and your application.
Right. I think this is wonderful. I think we're warning a part 2 to this discussion. Later on, we have some great questions, some awesome panelists, as I told you guys before. I'm just so thankful to all of you guys who are here, who will remain on the panel, and those who left for giving us your time today. We host several things like this in LS-PAC Models Center. We're happy to come back, Amy, to do a part 2 if you think it's necessary on the same topic or something different. We put the email address for LS-PAC Models in the chat as well as the website. Linked in with anyone that you see on the panel if you need any other questions or comments. And thank you for your time. We're just excited to have been with you all today.
Yes, and I definitely just want to echo that sentiment. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to the team at LS-PAC for putting together this wonderful panel and facilitating the conversation. As we can see by just the amount of questions, it's really important to hear from people who have been through that process and to share their insight. Some of the takeaways that I got from listening to our panelists are just to be true to yourself in your interview, and also to utilize the community around you in going through this process. And I think that's what we've done here in this panel. So as mentioned, this has been recorded. It will be available on our website. We'll also share it with the team at LS-PAC. So if they want to make that available on their YouTube, that will be available. Check both of our websites. I know they have some great events coming up, webinars. They have their conference coming up in July. The NPA, we have a number of different webinars, monthly and weekly, different series that might also be able to help you as you are going through your academic interview process. But again, thank you to everyone who is able to hang on with us. And yes, hopefully we'll be able to do a part 2 in the future, and hopefully everyone will be able to join us then. But enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.